Hi everybody, welcome to Lord of the Reads. So, in today's video, we're going to be doing my March wrap-up. If you watched my April T Bingo R video, you would know that I absolutely failed March's TBR. So, I picked 6 books that were put on my TBR, and I finished 3. No, it was a big failure. But I finished all of them. So, we're going to go through in-depth thoughts of each of them. This is going to be a shorter video because there are only 3 books. So, we can go ahead and get started with the first book, which is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This book is about a girl who does something, and because of it, she has to be taken by a fairy to live with him. I can't really say more than that because it would be a lot of spoilers. You can't really say very much about the synopsis at all. But in the world, there are fairies and there are high fae that are very magical, very powerful. And then you have specifically high lords, and each of those lords have a section of the fairy kingdom that they rule. So, the magic in here was super well thought out and descriptive. So, I think this ended up getting a 4-star, and I really enjoyed it, but what threw it off for me was the romance. I am not a big fan of romance. I don't read romance as a genre, and I'm okay with it in fantasy, as long as it doesn't take away from the fantasy itself. And in this book, I think that the fantasy kind of took away from, the romance took away from the fantasy a little bit. So, that's the only reason that it was taken down from a 5. But besides that, a lot of it I skipped over most of the romance because it was just a little unnecessary for me to read. It was just like repeating itself. So, it's not necessary to the story, so I did skip over some of it. But the fantasy was really good. The magic system, and the entire plot in general, this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and you can clearly see how it's Beauty and the Beast, and then at the end of the story, it kind of veers off of it just a little bit, and takes like an unexpected turn. And I really enjoyed that, because most retellings are pretty standard. Like, they go through the arc of the original story without adding anything, or without adding any extra plot points. But this book, they did the whole Beauty and the Beast thing, and then added another thing at the end, which was super interesting, and kind of set it apart from other retellings, which made it really good, and not what I was expecting. And the entire book, actually, towards the end, was not what I was expecting. So, it's very good. There was a really nice lead-up to what happened in the end, and it was a big thing, what happened in the end. But there was a nice lead-up, but it was still a surprise. So, I think that was very well done. I really enjoyed this book, and I will most likely be continuing with the series soon. Not sure when, but hopefully soon. But it was enjoyable, so it was a success. The next book that I read in March was Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. I love Leigh Bardugo's writing. A lot of people do, but the thing about, like, I read this right after I read A Court of Thorns and Roses, and A Court of Thorns and Roses kind of put me in a slump and brought me out of it at the same time, because it read kind of slower. Like, well, it read at the pace, at a normal pace, but once I would set it down, I would have no inclination to pick it back up again. And then when I did pick it back up, it was super interesting until I set it down again, and then I, once again, had no inclination to pick it back up. This book, I flew through it. I think I read it in 3 days. it was so different. And I think because I read the first book a while ago, it did a really good job at, like, bringing back those points from the first book so that you know anything that you may have forgotten. So the first book is about a girl, and she lives in this country, and in order for this country to trade with other countries, they have to cross something called a fold, and it's a shadowy place of darkness where evil things live, and they have to go through it. So she is in the military, so she has to go on a trading ship with a group of soldiers to bring back resources into her country. And on the ship, when they enter the fold, something happens, and everyone thinks that she has some kind of ability, because in this world there are people that can bend certain elements. So some people can bend fire, water, electricity, things like that. And they think that she has an ability that's never been had before, or hasn't been had for a long time. And like I said, this book does a really good job at, like, bringing in anything you may have forgotten from the first book. I didn't forget a whole lot because, I mean, I read the book, I think, in December, so there wasn't a huge gap. But anything that I missed was brought back in a really... It wasn't repetitive at all. Some books, as far as sequels go, when they try to reintroduce stuff, it gets really repetitive, but this did it in a way that wasn't repetitive. And there were so many twists in this book, I didn't know what to think. Like, so many things were brought in, like, new ideas were brought in, and the world itself, as far as the magic, is complex. It's not super difficult to understand, but there are a lot of moving pieces. And the way that Leigh Bardugo can balance all these things, because she brought in more things that were spectacular, like, so many more magical elements and stuff were added, that I wasn't expecting, and plots and all kinds of things were added that made the world even more complex, but it was still super easy to understand. It's spectacular. Also, this book is not... There are some books where you have everything's going right for the characters, and they can get kind of boring because there's no conflict. And even if, like, there were some things in most books, there will be good things that happen, and then there will also be bad things that happen. There's so many points in this book where things are going so right, like, all this hope is being built up, and then every single time it gets knocked down. Every single time. There are so many points in this book where you have all the characters, things are going right, they're preparing, and it looks like they're finally going to win, and then it doesn't work the way that they expected it to. And it's so, like, this book has so much conflict, and so many different pieces because of the complex world. So having all those different pieces and then lots of conflict, it really helps make the story fast-paced, and it doesn't make it boring with a lot of books where everything's going right for the characters. So having that conflict, it makes it super interesting, and I got this third book so I can read it as soon as possible, because I loved this, and I want to finish the series. Plus, the TV show adaptation for the Grishaverse, and I think the Six of Crows duology is coming out, I think sometime in April. I could be wrong, but I'm trying to get the books done as fast as possible so I can watch the adaptation. So, the next book will be coming. I'll hopefully be reading it soon. But this book was definitely a success. A really, really fun read, and I would really recommend it because it's so good. Okay, so the last book I read in March, I actually just finished it earlier today. I loved it so much. It is Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. I have a real issue with finishing series. I hate finishing series. And I've heard so many other booktubers talk about it, like, a series that you really enjoy, finishing it is heartbreaking because you know that you'll never be able to read it again for the first time. And reading a book for the first time is the most amazing thing ever, because you get that new sense and the surprise that happens when something happens. And whenever you finish a series, you never get that, even when you reread it. You'll get a part of it, but you'll never get that full experience again. And that's what happened when I finished this. This series is so good. The first book follows Katniss, and she lives in a world where there is this country that is run by a place called the Capital. And under the Capital there are 12 districts, and because of a war that happened between the districts and the Capital years ago, the Capital now requires something called the Hunger Games, where 2 children, a boy and a girl from each district, go and fight to the death for the entertainment of the Capital. And only one victor, one of those children, can live. And we follow Katniss, who volunteers so that her sister doesn't have to go into the Hunger Games. And she has to fight her way through. And the series got better as it went along. The second book, Catching Fire, was so good. It added a plot twist that I never would have expected. And Mockingjay, the beginning of it was not my favorite, because I really wasn't enjoying the way that that plot twist was going. But as it continued in this book, it actually became really good, and the way it was fleshed out. This is definitely my favorite of the 3 in the series. It's so good. And the plot twist was something that I never would have expected, but I can see how it's necessary. The end of the book it wasn't a happy ending. This is a dystopian, so, I mean, you're not really going to get a happy ending. But I expected more of a happy resolution than I got. I think because, like, this book, the whole series, there's a lot of death. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of death. And I figured, well, at the end they have to wrap it up with something happy. But no. And while the ending was a good resolution, it wasn't a joyous one, because the main character, Katniss, has to live with all the deaths that some that she thinks that she's caused, and just all the deaths that came from what she's done. And the way that it was spun, like, that whole conscience, like, she has that conscience where she feels that the deaths are somehow her fault, even if they're not. And so many people rely on her to keep them together, and she's struggling to keep her sanity in line. So, it was amazing the way that was brought together, and definitely a really good series, one of my favorites. I would definitely recommend it. Also, away from the story, this is my favorite cover in the series. The front cover, really nice, partly because my favorite color is blue. I can't help it. The front cover, but also that is just spectacular. I love the combination of silver and blue. It's really nice. So, it's aesthetically pleasing. The story is pleasing. Sad at some times, because I think there are more deaths in this one than any of the other ones, but very good. And I would definitely recommend the whole series because it is amazing. So that is my March wrap-up. March was kind of a fail for reading, but I did enjoy all the books that I read, so as far as that went, it's a success. So I'm counting it as a good thing just because I enjoyed all the books that I read, so I think it's a win. But with that, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments down below what you thought of the books that you read in March. And with that, I'll see you in my next video. Bye!